Good morning. Hello, Facebook Livers. Welcome back to another video of Live with Your Lobbyists from here in Helena. It's a very snowy, wintry day here. So while we wait for people to join and people to get on, why don't you, as you're joining, please give a shout out to where you're watching from and let us know how much snow everybody has. I know that this was a pretty impressive storm that swept across the state the last couple days, and for all the information I've seen, I think that the news sources and weathermen kind of underestimated the amount of snow we were going to get. So when you comment today to let us know where you're from and where you're watching us from, let us know how much snow everybody got. So I hope a lot of you are able to join us today. I hope that calving is going well, even with all the new snow, that calves and lambs are doing well and people were prepared for it. I have to give a big apology to everybody because we were scheduled to come on at 10 and I was at the Capitol this morning in a committee hearing and rushing around after that committee hearing trying to find a spot to get on Facebook and come and visit with you guys, and was having serious connection issues at the Capitol today. It would not let me connect to get on and visit with folks, so I had to really quickly rush back to our house/office here in Helena and get it all set up all over again. So sorry for being late. I hope that some of you guys are still able to join us. Again, if you're just joining us, please comment with where you're watching from. As you can tell, I'm Sans, my coworker today. It's just me. Nicole is participating in the second class of the Real Montana Leadership Program. And that group has been in Helena for a couple days. They've got a whole slate of meetings going on today with various government agencies and members of the legislature. So Nicole is really busy participating with that group and what they're doing. So she's not able to join us this morning. So you'll just have to suffer through a very late Facebook Live video with me on a very snowy day. So I know the odds are stacked against us, but I hope that you'll all bear with me. Thanks for getting on. I see we have a few folks watching, so let us know where you're watching from and tell me how much snow we've got out there that's piled up around the state, because there's a lot here in Helena. I bet we got close to 6 inches of new snow yesterday, and I know that was one of the smaller amounts that different parts of this state received. So we'll get jumped into the video for this week here. We are back after the transmittal break. Everybody at the legislative session got to take a little bit of a break and go home for a while. And, thankfully while we went home, it was really beautiful weather across the state and everybody got tempted by a few very, very spring-like days over transmittal break. And now we're back at it and the snow continues to pile up. So I guess that means it's a typical springtime in Montana. But things are picking up speed pretty quickly after transmittal break. It doesn't take so long for bills to get scheduled and hearings to be held because after transmittal break, it's basically repeating the process for the majority of the bills that we've already talked about. So this week was a little bit more of that. There are still some types of bills that can be new and introduced after transmittal, but those bills must be revenue bills, meaning that they have money or an appropriation attached to them. So any general bill that didn't make it out of a committee prior to the transmittal date is dead at this time, and so we are only hearing bills that were passed by, if it was a Senate bill, it had to have been passed by the Senate floor. If it was a House bill, it had to have been passed by the House floor at this point in time if it's a general bill. Revenue bills have a transmittal deadline, but it is later, and so they still have a couple of weeks to introduce revenue bills to the legislature. So there still is a chance we're going to see some new stuff popping up, and there are a few new things that I'll mention and visit about this morning as well. But for the most part, this latter half of the legislative session is going to be dealing with stuff we've already heard or talked about and just following up and making sure it makes it all the way through the process. So a couple of things that I will catch us back up on have been updates. Of course, the budget process is still going on. The subcommittees of the House Appropriations Committee have finished their work going through the different sections of the budget. They have the sections labeled as A, B, D, C, etc. And so those subcommittees had finished their work, and now the House Appropriations Committee is taking executive action on all of those sections of the budget. So that has been going well. This week, Department of Ag, Department of Livestock, as well as the MSU and extension budgets were all before the House Appropriations Committee. And next week, Thursday and Friday, there are actually no committee hearings so that we can have floor hearings on House Bill 2. So that'll take up almost a full 2 days of the legislature's time in the House to get through floor discussion on House Bill 2. So a couple things to keep you updated on. The Department of Livestock and the Department of Ag came through the budget process in really good shape, and we're going to keep following through the process, but there haven't been any substantive changes to those budgets as they were proposed. The extension budget is a slightly different situation, though. We did talk about this a little bit earlier in the legislative cycle, but there have been cuts made to every agency of government this year. There was a 5% cut made that was applied to everybody who receives money from the state because budgets are tight and we need to budget accordingly. However, in the MSU extension world, they received some pretty significant cuts. Their cuts are totaling almost 10%. It's right at about 9.6% to the extension program, and they have a roughly $6 million budget. And so when you start talking 9 to 10% cuts to a $6.5 million budget, that is a significant amount of money and is potentially going to have some ramifications for positions that they hire and services that they're able to offer. So that is something that we're continually trying to look for avenues to mitigate that cut. We're not going to be able to likely restore them to full funding because no agency is necessarily going to make it out with full funding. But what we hope to do is at least minimize those cuts and bring them more into the range of what the rest of the agencies under the MSU under the MSU umbrella received, which varies somewhere in the lower percentage points, the 3-4% area. So that's something I would encourage all of you guys out there who are familiar with extension and you're familiar with the services that offer, whether it be through a 4-H program or the research that they do or other programs within communities. We really need to reach out to that House Appropriations Committee. We really need to reach out to every representative on the House floor and let them know how important those services are to Montanans that extension has to offer. Once House Bill 2 has passed the House, it will be turned over to the Senate, and the Senate gets to look at things from their point of view over there. So we do have a little bit of time here to be working on this, but they need to hear from people how important this is, because if we're not there showing up fighting for this funding, it doesn't give them any justification or evidence that restoration of that funding is needed. So I see we have a few other people jumping on to join us. Let us know where you're from. You guys know the drills. Post a comment telling us where you're from and where you're watching from. And as always, chime in if you have any questions. I'm by myself today, so we don't have a ton of stuff to cover, so we can answer questions and go from there. One other thing that I'll update you all on is Senate Bill 155 and the progress there. Senate Bill 155 is what has been nicknamed the seed bill this legislative session, and that is something we've talked about a lot. You've heard us talk about that a lot, but it's really important to the agricultural industry. Senate Bill 155 was heard before the House Agriculture Committee on Tuesday afternoon, and I just want to give a quick shout out to some of our folks who were in town for our Farm Bureau Council of Presidents and the MFBF Board of Directors meeting over those 2 days, because they took time out of their agenda to come to the Capitol and testify on that bill, and they did a phenomenal job. Everybody did a really great job. I couldn't have said it better. You guys make my life so easy on the Hill when you were willing to come up and share your stories and share your expertise with those committees. So thanks to all of you. Jill Street from Hill Liberty Blaine County, she testified and did a great job. Don Steinbeiser Jr. from Eastern Montana out in Sydney area. Thank you, number one, for making the ginormous drive over here and for testifying before that committee. Rhonda Hergenreiter from down in the Bridger area also made the trip up to testify. And thank you to all of you who have written letters to the editor, who have written letters to your legislators on this piece of legislation. I thank you. I want you to know how sincerely I appreciate those efforts. But I also want you to know that we're not done. And we have a lot more work to do on this bill, and it just goes to show the desperate need to educate our elected officials about agriculture. So that bill's going to be up for executive action in the House Ag Committee some point in the next couple of weeks. I don't know exactly when yet, but it's really imperative that we communicate with the members of the House Ag Committee on the importance of Senate Bill 155. A couple examples of why that's necessary is I want to demonstrate to you some of the things that came out during the testimony in that hearing, which I actually believe, excuse me, I actually believe that at least a partial part of the testimony from that hearing is on MFBF's Facebook page, or might be at some point in time, or potentially on our YouTube channel. So as you can tell, I don't have a ton of information about that, but I know we recorded it. So you can check that out a little bit if you'd like. You can also watch the recorded hearing on the legislative website. But there's just some misconceptions floating around out there about this bill, what it does, and how it's going to impact our state. And first of all, one of the things that came out of that committee that needs tons of clarification, and we can't say this enough, but there's a misconception out there that by passing this bill, we are going to allow the growth of genetically engineered wheat varieties in the state of Montana that will threaten our wheat exports. And that is absolutely not true. First of all, there is no commercially available variety of genetically engineered wheat available to any farmer or rancher who wants to plant it. There's a few reasons why that's the case. That's because industry, organizations, grower groups, seed companies invest a lot of money into research. And part of that research is research into marketing and what our consumers want. And we know that our consumers who are buying Montana's high quality, world-renowned wheat aren't necessarily engineered in a genetically, interested in a genetically engineered variety at this time. Therefore, we're not growing it because our market is not demanding it and there's not a need for it. So the passage of Senate Bill 155 has absolutely no implications on the use or potential hypothetical use one day of genetically engineered wheat if it's ever made commercially available for growth. So that's the first misconception floating around out there. The second misconception that we really need to address and educate our legislators on is along the topic of consolidation within our seed dealer markets. There were some statements made during testimony, and legislators, I think, who while good intention, don't necessarily understand what that means. And there's some misinformation or potentially just a misunderstanding out there that seed consolidation in our marketplace is directly impacted by legislation like Senate Bill 155. Again, completely not true. Seed consolidation of seed companies, there have been a couple in the news very recently, will happen with or without this piece of legislation. This legislation does nothing preventing market and business-based decisions of those seed companies to consolidate. And secondly, and probably the most important point on this, the consolidation of a seed company does not mean that seeds are destroyed and disappeared and those varieties become unavailable. That's not at all what that means. So I want to make it very clear to our legislators that those are two quite frankly, red herrings that exist out there and unfortunate misconceptions about what this piece of legislation does. And based on the fact that those 2 points that I made about wheat and one about seed consolidation both hinge directly on drivers in our markets, business and financial decisions that private entities and other organizations can make, are even more testimony to why we need a bill like Senate Bill 155 in our state, so that we have the regulatory authority and the level playing field in place to ensure that the business decisions are exactly the business decisions of the farmers and ranchers themselves and no one else, regardless of your cultivation practices or your cropping systems. So I just want to put that out there for you guys. Those are 2 areas that I think we really need to focus on education with our legislators on. So again, like I said, thank you to those of you that have put in the effort so far. We're not done. Please do it again. Additionally, please feel free to loop the governor in on some of your communications as well, because if all goes accordingly, this is going to be on his desk here over sometime in the next several weeks. And so it's important that we let him know and his office know how vitally important this piece of legislation is to Montana as well. So thanks to everybody that is watching and joining. If you are just jumping on, send us a comment. Let us know where you're watching from, and please jump in with questions anytime you've got any questions. A couple new bills I'll talk about quickly that we worked on this week. One of them was House Bill 342, which is carried by Representative Ross Fitzgerald. And what this bill does is allows or provides a definition for agritourism and adds it to a section of code that limits liability based on the inherent risks of the activity you might be participating in. So that was pretty, plain English, so to speak. But what that means is that it got added to the section of code. I believe it has to do with sporting and recreation events. So this is the same section of code where we limit liability for dude ranching or for outfitting or for other areas or other practices where you would accept money in exchange for an experience. So agritourism hasn't been included in that before in our state. There are other states that have agritourism laws on the books, and we definitely want something like that on our books in Montana for a few reasons. We know the volatility of our markets, and we know that commodity prices constantly change. And so one thing that a lot of folks are branching off into is diversifying their farm and ranch by incorporating some form of agritourism. You may not necessarily be a full-blown dude ranch, but potentially you rent a cabin on your property and invite people out for a working ranch experience, and they make reservations and can stay with you. Or you may have a farm or a pumpkin patch, and you sell pumpkins in the fall and invite people to come out and do a U-pick and share that experience with them. And what this does is it does not do away with any liability exposure. It doesn't say that we can be completely negligent and provide an unsafe experience in an unsafe environment and get away with it. All it simply does is essentially kind of shift the burden of proof a little bit in those instances and provide a little bit more coverage for families who are engaging in agritourism events. So that's a pretty positive bill, because we know that in our country, people are 3 and 4 generations removed from a farm or ranch. Less than 2% of our country's population is engaged in any segment of production agriculture, and there is consistently growing interest to know more about what we do in agriculture and how food is grown. And agritourism is a fantastic way to connect with your consumers on a very personal level and give them a hands-on experience and teach them about what we do in agriculture. But we need some of these additional coverages to make sure that we're protected in the end too, and that we're not essentially jeopardizing our ability to do business by offering these experiences. So that was a bill that was heard yesterday before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we supported it and hope that it'll make it out of that committee. I think it will. There were several proponents and only one opponent to that piece of legislation. Another bill that was new this week we worked on dealt with increasing the exemption in the business equipment tax. Senate Bill 327 proposes to increase the exemption from currently it's at $100,000 and would seek to increase that exemption up to, I believe, $350,000 for business equipment. Farm Bureau policy supports this because we all know that when you are purchasing agricultural equipment or investing in new inputs, it's not cheap. Tractors and combines and swathers and semis, they add up very quickly, and you've spent $100,000 pretty easily when you start buying some of that newer equipment. And so this would provide a little bit more tax relief to our membership when they're making those investments. And secondly, it's also a good incentive that stimulates our local economies when you're working with a local implement dealer and are able to receive that tax relief. It makes it a little more palatable and easier to budget an expense like that. And secondly, there is a provision in this piece of legislation that does backfill the county governments for the loss from being able to tax the difference in that income. So there is a mechanism there that would keep the county governments whole and backfill the tax dollars while still providing that tax burden relief up to a new level of $350,000. So those are actually the only two new bills that we testified on this week. Like I said, we're mostly just hearing repeats now. So if you're just joining us, it's the week after transmittal and we're coming back and are revisiting many pieces of legislation that we've already heard and discussed and just continuing to track them through the process. So please comment with where you're watching us from. Let us know. Tell me how much snow you guys got, because that storm, I think, dumped a lot more than it was necessarily predicted to do. So tell me where you're watching from and how much snow you got, and let me know if you've got any questions about anything going on in the legislature. If it's not a bill I'm watching, I will, one, tell you that and at least try to take a stab at providing some information. There were, a couple other things I wanted to update you guys on real quickly. There's going to be some discussion this legislative session about aquatic invasive species in the state of Montana. We are in the process right now of setting up a framework for an aquatic invasive species basically prevention program to keep those species out of our state. So those are things like quagga mussels or zebra mussels. There's Eurasian milfoil is another one that we actually already have in the state of Montana, but we're mostly concerned right now with keeping those mussels out of our state. There's a lot of other states farther east, the Great Lakes region and other areas of the state that are battling these invasive species and have effectively lost that battle. Once you get these mussels in there, they have no natural enemies, nothing eats them, and they proliferate very quickly. And so there are states that now have aquatic invasive species programs that range in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and they're not preventing it, they're simply managing the problem. And that's something, as a headwaters state, we don't want to see happen in the state of Montana. And it is becoming an increasing threat. In fact, last fall, there was a larva of a mussel found on Tiber Reservoir in north central Montana. And so the Departments of Natural Resources and the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks have kind of teamed up in what was a bit of an emergency situation to double down on boat inspections and making sure that there were checkpoints established for folks coming in from other bodies of water, especially those out of state, to ensure they were clear of any larvae or mussels themselves. And what we're doing now is having to come up with legislation that's going to fund that program, which is pretty problematic for a lot of reasons, because you've heard us say time and time again that the budget is really tight this year. Montana does not have a surplus. And so our legislators are working hard to come out with a balanced budget, and budgeting for a brand new program that's going to range into the millions of dollars is not something they had planned on. And so the funding for this is going to have to come from tax money. It's going to have to come from fees of some kind. It's going to have to come from us as citizens of the state. So there's not really any bill language available yet, but we have been attending meetings to discuss this problem because agriculture is one of the industries that stands to lose the most when we begin talking about irrigation ways and canal systems and rivers and reservoirs that become clogged with these mussels. Because if you guys have never seen this, I would encourage you to, Google a picture of a zebra mussel or a quagga mussel and see the damage they can do. We've seen in testimony, folks have brought in pieces of 4 to 6 inch PVC irrigation pipe that was submerged in a water body that was infected with mussels, and within a period of about 6 months, they had clogged it 100%. There's nothing, there's nothing you can really do to control them or prevent them. Once they're there, and they proliferate really quickly. And so it's pretty important in our state that we get this framework up and running to prevent any more contamination in Montana waters, and hopefully to make sure we have those checkpoints in place long term. So we're working pretty hard to make sure that we can get the funding for that, but also at the same time realize that the funding is spread out equitably among all of the people involved, and that agriculture doesn't wind up sharing the brunt of this load just because we're irrigators and our industry stands to lose the most. So this is a huge statewide problem because the waterways of our states are vitally important to so much of what we do, that this is something everybody needs to participate in. So there will be a lot more information coming out on aquatic invasive species and the establishment of that program. There was a fund created one session ago, I believe it was in the 2015 session, that established a permanent fund for aquatic invasive species. So as we're looking at it now, the discussion has been that fund is going to work very similar to the Coal Trust Fund in the state of Montana, in that you pay into it for a certain number of years to reach a certain threshold of money, and then after that, the interest generated off the money in that account will solely fund the program. So we're hoping to achieve something like that, because what that means is that eventually the additional fees or the additional taxes would sunset for our members, and you wouldn't be paying it forever. We would essentially just be contributing until we were able to get that fund to a certain point. So that's a positive framework, I think, because it provides an end in sight for our folks, and is something we need to focus on when we're looking to protect agriculture, both from aquatic invasive species, but also from additional tax burden on our members. So that's something that's going to be coming out in the next couple weeks. I predict to see a bill very early next week. We haven't seen it yet, but I predict we'll see it very early next week and have some language available. So my guess would be you'll be hearing a little bit more from us about that. Everybody's been very quiet viewers this morning. I've gotten no comments, so that must mean that there's no questions, which is fine. But if you do have questions, go ahead and give me a shout out and let me know what you're thinking or what you'd like to hear more about on these videos. Otherwise, I'll sit tight for just a couple more moments and then probably call it a day, since I was already so far behind that most of you guys have much better things to be doing at this point. So let me know if there's any questions floating around out there. While I give you guys a second to type some of those questions up, I would issue another reminder that we have our third and final Calling on the Capital event coming up in a couple of weeks here in Helena. The next event is March 21st and 22nd, I believe, and it will be here in Helena at the Capitol. Additionally, that's a great opportunity to come and meet with legislators, because our Women's Leadership Committee serves breakfast one morning to legislators in the Capitol. So not only do you come and have a great breakfast provided by that committee, you also get some good one-on-one time with your legislator over a hot cup of coffee and some cinnamon rolls. So I would encourage everybody to please take some time to come up here for the day. Let us know what you'd like to hear about while you're here, and it's a good opportunity to catch your legislators. And there is registration information either on our Facebook or it is at our website as well. You can register online. If you have any questions about that event, you can contact Sue Ann at our office in Bozeman. That number is 587-3153. Next week, we have a very busy week in the Capitol. There are, of course, a ton of bills up. They're not wasting any time getting through a lot of the general bills that made it through the transmittal deadline, which is fine by me because that means the faster we get the work done, the faster we can wrap this up with a pretty little bow and dust our hands off for another 2 years. So we're good with that. But next week we have, it's National Egg Week, or excuse me, the Egg Day Luncheon is next week. During the legislative session, and the Department of Agriculture always puts that luncheon on. And so that's a great opportunity. We have a fantastic meal. They always do such a great job. And a lot of the egg groups from around the state come and participate, and we pack the Capitol. It's actually, I'm proud to say, one of the most well-attended, largest lunch events that take place in the Rotunda during the legislative session. They typically plan to feed around 400 people, and almost always they're down to the very tiniest scraps at the end. So that's phenomenal, and it's a great opportunity for those of us in agriculture to take part in that. So that, if you're in town, make sure you stop by the Rotunda, because that's another great opportunity to find a legislator. The following week is National Egg Week. So that's going to be when we are having our call-in on the Capitol, the 21st and the 22nd. There's some information for you there in the comments that just popped up. So National Egg Week is there. We will be having breakfast during National Egg Day. That's a great opportunity to visit with our folks again. So I hope many of you will be able to join us for that Calling on the Capitol event. And if you've got this last call for questions, so if anybody has anything they'd like to hear more about, it's your last chance to ask it live. I should say it's not your last chance. It's your last chance to ask it live. If you're watching the replay, thank you for watching the replay, and feel free to type your questions out in the comment section and we'll get back to you. So I will go ahead and sign off for another week, and we will be in touch for another Facebook Live next week. So I hope that everybody is enjoying our snowy weather all across the state. I hope that calving and lambing's going well, and I hope everybody is safe, warm, and dry, and we'll see you next week. Bye.